Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy Monday to you all. Hope you enjoyed your weekend. You have tuned into your Alaska Weather Show. Tonight is July 24th, 2017. I'm meteorologist Mike Ottenweller of the National Weather Service. Be taking you through the forecast tonight. As always, if you need to get in touch with our office here in Anchorage or any of the 3 offices across the state, 1-800-472-0391 and follow the prompts that will be on there. Otherwise, weather.gov/Alaska to get the entire state perspective as well. And if you have any questions or comments that you need to get in touch with somebody, nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov is a good email address for us. So let's jump into our headlines for tonight. We're going to talk first about our active weather pattern that continues along the Brooks Range. For those folks over the northern half of the state, they know exactly what I'm talking about, with fairly widespread, decent rainfall, ½ inch or more throughout many places from Nome over to the eastern half of the state, and that pattern will continue at least for the next 12 to 24 hours or so. And then wet and cooler weather for southern Alaska, just generally seeing a cloudier and wetter pattern set up with southwest flow over majority of the state, mainly over towards the Alaska Range, but we are seeing some of that cloud cover creep into the Cook Inlet region as well. Fog and marine stratus over the Bering, and that's going to be a long-term, long-lasting effects out there as there's a high pressure in charge, and we'll talk about that some here in the next few images. And then a new system will move into southeast Alaska after a fairly quiet period for those folks as well. And with that, we'll see that moving in late on Tuesday. So as far as our hazards tonight, we do have a couple to talk about. First time I've had to use this map in a while, but we do have a flood advisory in effect for the northwest Brooks Range, and that is in effect until tomorrow, Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. And that, again, is mainly for the Ambler region just because of that heavy rainfall that's been basically from the Nome up through Ambler and Bettles area. For the southern portion of the Brooks Range over towards Arctic Village, we do have a wind advisory, and that is in effect until 10 p.m. tonight. And then up along the Arctic coast here, actually just while I was coming over to the studio, we had a few advisories drop here just south of Barrow and for Wainwright to Point Hope, but we do still have a coastal high surf advisory for Prudhoe Bay and Kaktovik area, and that is until 6 a.m. Tuesday morning. So these 2 zones have dropped, but these 2 remain in effect. So taking a look at our fire danger now, well, as you would imagine across southern Alaska, it's been pretty quiet. We just have a small area of high danger here, and that's tucked right up against the Wrangell-St. Elias in the Copper River Basin. And that, again, pretty small area, not a whole lot of fire weather concerns. A little bit more dry conditions up towards the northeastern portion of the state there in the Yukon and upper Tanana valleys. There we can see some extreme, some pockets of extreme, but again, those are just pockets. For the most part, fire danger has been fairly low, and we don't expect any widespread lightning in the next several days to really help to increase things, or dry conditions for that matter. Taking a look at our satellite loop now, you'll see an abundance of cloud cover spreading in from the southwest up towards the northeast. Just kind of a general weak area of high pressure lining right here, kind of stretching from the Aleutian Range up along the Alaska Range, and then off towards Fairbanks and into the northwestern portions of the Yukon Territory. So with that, just a general increase in cloud cover, some precipitation starting in southwestern portions of the state, and some of that precip making its way all the way up into the Tanana Valley. Area of low pressure down here in the Gulf of Alaska, not overly strong, but it will start to strengthen over the next couple days. We can take a look at that here as we set this in motion again. You can see just a little bit of a clockwise swirl, not anything super impressive, and so not expecting a lot from this, but it will organize before it moves onshore on Tuesday. Our big story, though, out over the west is the high pressure out over the Bering. You can see all these low clouds here, marine stratus and fog. Let me switch over to the IR, the infrared image, and some of these darker looking clouds actually are that lower stratus, and you can see a pretty widespread area of that out over the Bering Sea. And then widespread cloud cover, of course, up towards the Brooks Range where we have had all that rain, and the flow continues to be quickly from the west to the east, and with that, a fairly active storm track. And we have yet another system just starting to drop down here out over northeastern Russia. And with that, we will be talking about how that'll impact the state here in the next couple days. So for today's weather, you can see our light rain associated with that weak area of low pressure, kind of this kink in the isobars here is this trough of low pressure. And so with that, just some light rain starting to fall towards Dutch Harbor. Wasn't quite raining at Dutch as of this afternoon, but it was starting to make its way into the Bristol Bay area and starting to stretch up along the Aleutian Range from basically Lake Iliamna up into Fairbanks and off towards the east towards Chicken and Eagle. Some smoke reported over the northeastern portion of the interior Alaska as well. Just some residual fire smoke and some haze, but don't expect any widespread reduction to visibility. Up along the Arctic coast here, this is where our last front just moved through, and our next one is already queued up there just over to the north of the Bering Strait. And so we'll continue to see active weather with some patchy fog in between. As we look down towards southeast Alaska here, we have our area of high pressure, helping to keep things relatively dry across the Cook Inlet and southeast Alaska today. But here is that area of low pressure that we talked about, and we'll see that start to inch closer towards the state as we go through the next 24 hours. So on into tonight's forecast, you can see showers continue to make their way from west to east very slowly here out over southwest Alaska. Expect rain to spread into the King Salmon and Dillingham areas, and possibility of a shower out over Cook Inlet and certainly up north in the Susitna Valley as we go through the overnight hours tonight. Still expecting some patchy fog over the interior portions of the state without a whole lot of steering flow. Nothing really to clear that area out, so anything that's kind of trapped in those valleys will probably stay in those valleys. Once you get up to the Arctic coast here, we can expect some more fog tonight and a little bit lighter winds, so that's why that wind advisory for the Brooks Range will expire at 10 p.m. And then out over the Seward Peninsula, this is where we have our next area of cold air starting to drop down. This isn't going to make its way very far south, but it certainly will bring another round of wind and some rain to the Seward Peninsula. Nothing as much as the last 24 hours, but certainly expecting another a little bout of rain out there. And then towards the Aleutian Chain and the Alaska Peninsula, just some light rain for you folks out there without a whole lot of wind expected with this system. And there's our areas of fog and some drizzle out over the Aleutian Chain. So taking a look now into Tuesday, and here's that system that we talked about starting to make its way northward only at 1,012 millibars, so not overly strong by any stretch of the imagination, but it will spread some more rain into southeast Alaska, so that dry stretch of weather that you have had will come to an end. As far as over the interior, we do expect a better chance for thunderstorms Tuesday afternoon, mainly over the eastern Copper River Basin and just areas just slightly north of that, right along this boundary here, this Arctic boundary. Again, that cold air is not going to make its way very far south with this system, so it will kind of fall apart here over the west coast, but still bring a good chance for some showers, especially as some of that moisture fuses with this area of lower pressure, or this trough as we call it. As it starts to merge with that area, we'll see widespread shower activity all the way up from Cook Inlet into the Alaska Range and up towards the Tanana Valley. High pressure remains in control out over the Bering Sea with plenty of marine stratus and fog. And finally into Wednesday now, you can see our area of low pressure has fizzled out over southeast Alaska, but with that we do see continued rain showers in the forecast with some wet weather as that front slowly dies out over that area. Out over southern Alaska, we do have still weak low pressure without a whole lot of real strong systems. Just expect general cloud cover to be fairly widespread and some light precipitation, nothing overly heavy throughout the area. And again, that cold front has now retreated back north, so not expecting a great surge in cold air, but certainly the cloud cover to keep conditions cooler than they have been over the last 48 hours for southern Alaska. High pressure finally starts to bring a break up along the Arctic coast, but with high pressure we can always expect some patchy fog up there. And then a weak system tries to make it over this strong ridge over the Bering, but struggles to do so as that ridge is really in place, and it'll only just be some light precipitation for sections of the Pribilof Islands. Taking a look at the temperature forecast the temperatures as of 4 p.m. this afternoon. Generally across southeast Alaska, low to mid 50s for the most part, with some places making it into the low 60s. 62 at Skagway and at Yakutat, those were the warm spots. 60 degrees here in the Cordova area in Prince William Sound, and up towards south central Alaska, generally mid to low 60s with some low 70s in the Copper River Basin. Over the interior portion of the state, 60 degrees at Fairbanks with general upper 50s to low 60s across much of the interior portion of the state. Quite a bit cooler than those sunny days that we've had in the past few days. And then up along the Brooks Range and areas northward, even climbing up into the 50s there over the northern portion of the state. Seward Peninsula generally in the low to mid 50s. And out over southwest Alaska, we had Bethel coming in at 55 degrees as of 4 o'clock. Dillingham was 55 and King Salmon was 59. And towards the Alaska Peninsula, generally conditions in the low to mid 50s. What does tonight's low temperatures hold? Well, not a whole lot of change with those clouds moving in. Generally expect that blanket of cloud cover to kind of keep things where they are. So expecting low to mid 50s for southeast Alaska. Going to be pretty much the same story for much of southern Alaska, unless you're out here where the skies remain clear, generally low 50s to upper 40s for the Copper River Basin. Up over the interior, a pretty warm night there as well, with temperatures hovering in the mid 50s. Not until you get north of the Brooks Range do you see things drop off into the 40s and upper 30s. Southwest Alaska, you can expect lows mainly around 50 degrees tonight. For tomorrow's high temperatures with widespread cloud cover, you can expect a little bit more homogeneity here with the temperatures. Low 60s all the way from southeast Alaska through south central and just upper 50s towards southwest Alaska. The warmer spots will be where skies break and clear skies and some sunshine can get through. Upper 60s up there towards the Tanana Valley, and then generally in the mid 50s to upper 40s for the Arctic coastline. For our flying weather, you can see here a fairly widespread area of IFR instrument flight rules conditions, and that's of course because of our fog and low stratus that's going to be out there hampering any kind of aviation conditions. Up over the mainland portion of the state, just a few small pockets here of IFR conditions with some of that moisture being banked up right against the mountains there and through some of the passes. Some IFR conditions also up along the Arctic coast there. As you'd expect with the active weather, we do have some lower ceilings and visibility, and primarily due to some fog, and so that will be IFR in those areas as well. And then fairly widespread MVFR throughout southeast Alaska and over southwest Alaska as that broad moisture starts to move into the state and getting trapped in the terrain. Not a whole lot of change in conditions expected for tomorrow afternoon for the flying weather. A little bit broader area of IFR conditions over southeast Alaska as we see that system work from from south to north. And then again, our area of IFR conditions out over the Bering with an uptick in IFR conditions into Bristol Bay as some fog and stratus makes its way in there. Improving conditions though for the Arctic with just marginal visual flight rules. So looking at our passes now, Inutuvik Pass is going to be improving through the day. Adigan will be doing the same. Lake Clark and Merrill will remain marginal visual flight rules. Rainy is going to go from instrument flight rules to marginal visual flight rules. Same with Windy. And as far as Isabel, that will be marginal visual flight rules. Mentasta going to VFR by late in the day. Tanita will be improving to MVFR by late in the day. And Portage will be MVFR throughout the day. And Chilkoot and White will also be improving throughout the day. How about our freezing levels? Well, as you'd expect with all this warm air that we've had and the abundant sunshine still for parts of southeast Alaska, freezing levels all the way up above 10,000 feet here over parts of the Copper River Basin and for southeast Alaska. It's not until you get way up north of the Bering Strait that you see the surface line there, and that's where that cold air is going to try to surge south from, but it's not going to make it very far as the high pressure out over the Bering kind of holds that warmer air still a little bit further to the north. It's still only July. We haven't made it to August yet, so still hoping for a few more weeks of summer here. For icing, you can expect generally light to isolated moderate pockets throughout much of the area where those that southwest mid-level flow is helping to usher some moisture in, and it's going to be fairly high up in the atmosphere, again, 10,000 feet and above. And for our jet stream, well, it's pretty quiet actually. We just have one area of low pressure that we saw there on satellite spinning in the southeastern portion of the Gulf, and really the dominant feature is this high that's kind of parked out over the North Pacific. It's not terribly atypical this time of year, but it does make for a quieter pattern. So we just have 90 knots coming out of the northwest and moving to the southeast out over the Aleutian Chain, and then circling back up around this area of low pressure at about 80 knots here, moving off into Canada. A weak area of jet streak at about 75 knots, supporting that zonal flow across the northern portion of the state and keeping the pattern active up there. And there we do have some stronger systems up over the Arctic, but they so far are holding up in that region. How about our 9,000 foot winds? Well, here's our area of confluence or convergent flow coming around this high and coming around this low. Definitely a little unusual, but you can expect a little bit of turbulence in these areas here to see the high and the low that close together. But nonetheless, for the most part across the state, it's that southwest becoming north or to the northeast flow at about 20 to 15 knots for much of the mainland. Out over the Bering Sea, flow is generally northwest to southeast at about 25 knots, and that's coming over top of that ridge. And then a little bit stronger flow again at 9,000 feet, 50 knots, supporting these lows that are moving quickly along the Arctic coast. How about for our 3,000-foot winds? Well, out over southeast Alaska, things remain pretty quiet with only 5 knots out of the south. Towards the southern portion of the Gulf, that area of low pressure has got counterclockwise flow at about 25 knots. And then up over the mainland, again, seeing that continued southwest to northeast flow, 10 to 20 knots up there, and that really remains consistent across the entirety of the state, just kind of following the terrain of the Alaska Range and all the way up into the Brooks Range. Out over the Aleutians, flow generally over that ridge at about 20 knots. And so what does that mean for our turbulence? Well, you can generally expect all of it out over the Bering Sea, where the flow is a little bit stronger and a little bit more confused, and it's going to be generally below 5,000 feet with just one small pocket of the isolated occasional, that should actually be occasional widespread moderate, not severe. So just take note of that. That should be moderate, not severe. And stay tuned. We'll be back with your marine forecast.
They're called hooligan candlefish, cigarfish. They're really, really oily fish. They're a little on the mushy side, so we like to fry them. And we decided to go upriver, about maybe half mile upriver, and fish off the bank there. For me, one of the nice things about the fish is actually that there's a lot of other populations other than like the local Athabascans and Alaska Native people that go down there and take advantage of it. There's a lot of Pacific Island people, a lot of Korean people, a lot of other Asian folks out there. They all love these little fish, and they all go out there every year and catch them, bring them home. I think people really just enjoy getting their own food. Obviously we don't have to, we could just go to the store, but it's kind of like the principle, you know, you go out there and you're going out there with your family and your friends and you're, you know, getting food. I take my family out, that's the way I grew up. I grew up in Nome. We spent a lot of our winter and definitely all of our summer subsistence hunting and fishing. And for me, I don't know, I just feel like it was a great way to grow up, and it's really foreign to me when people don't have those experiences. And so I really, really wanted my kids to, you know, have that experience and to know where their food comes from. You know, I don't want them just to think that all their fish comes from the grocery store or comes packaged in little packages of meat. Like, I want them to know that it comes from other beings that live on this earth, and, you know, for them to have some respect for that. There's a lot of other distractions, like my oldest son really, really likes Angry Birds a lot, way too much. I want him to learn to enjoy being outside and learning to enjoy harvesting your own food. When I was growing up, actually, my mom, she gets amazed by this, but we'd wake up in the morning, eat breakfast, and go out and play, and she would have no clue where we were or what we were doing until lunchtime. Then we'd come back hungry, eat, and then go back outside and play again until it was night. I don't know, maybe if the world's changed or just because she's gotten older or whatever, but now with my kids, like, she can't even let them out of her sight. I started working in canneries. I started working on the docks for a little bit, ended up on a tender, went over to Bristol Bay, so I spent some time commercial fishing. Then I actually traveled around the United States as a pitch salesman for a little bit. Like the dude who sells the ShamWow, kind of like the commercials that you see on TV where everything's $29.95, $19.95, $9.95. I would do that live starting at the Alaska State Fair. I stopped being a pitch salesman. I went to my brother's Marine Corps graduation, my younger brother, and when I was watching that, I decided that was something that I would like to do. And then went back home to Alaska and then joined the Marine Corps from Alaska. Well, we were scouts. Our job was to be on the ground. And so our job was anything that had to do on the ground. We were forward recon. We'd clear houses and stuff like that. Every time that we stopped, we'd do a sweep for IEDs, improvised explosive devices. I'm sure everybody knows what those are by now. Even when I was growing up, my mom said that after I got done with high school, I was going to go to college, and I wasn't going to college for me. You know, she said that, you need to go to college so you can learn, and then you can come back, and then you can, serve your people, basically. I guess that just was part of the way that we were raised. I mean, even when we were out fishing, I wasn't just fishing for myself. I was actually fishing for friends and family as well. And it's not a burden or anything. I'm happy to do it. you know, and the Marine Corps wasn't a burden either. It was kind of a pain at times, but I really feel like maybe part of the reason why I try to do this subsistence stuff so much is because the education that I want to get now is my UPIC education, you know. Even though I did grow up subsistence and stuff like that, we moved away right around the time that I would have been going out and starting to do things like seal hunting and, you know, going on the big hunting trips and stuff like that. So I never actually got to do that kind of stuff. So I'm starting to learn it all now, and I'd like to go home and I'd like to learn the Yupik language. I know some, I don't know enough, and I'd like to learn more, you know, about how we do things. My Yupik name is Nava. How we name is that when you're born, whoever has died around the time that you're born, you get their name. You know, so I got my name was from my great-grandma, Mamie Seaton. Her name was Nava. I don't know what it means. I asked one of my uncles about it, and he just told me that the name was one of those, it was an old name, so they didn't actually know what it meant anymore. And so I think about that, about how far back that name goes. You know, if it's thousands of years, if it's 5,000 years, 6,000 years, how far back that name goes. And so it's this, it's a really tangible connection with my past and history, and it helps ground me and to know where I come from, and that I literally am standing here because of all the people that came before me on this entire planet. I think that we've become really arrogant and really disconnected from not only just like the earth, and I also hate how cheesy that sounds now. Like, people have made it cheesy to where I sound like some sort of hippie when I say the connection to the earth, but hey, that's legit. I mean, we are part of the earth.
Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your segment there. Taking a look at the sea surface temperatures, really the only area to draw your attention to is just these super warm pockets approaching nearly 60 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 15 degrees Celsius there, just along the west coast. So pretty warm conditions, as we've had a pretty warm summer for much of the area out there, especially with the limited ice pack. Speaking of the ice pack, here it is up along the Arctic coastline. Just starting to see that marginal area continuing to get a little bit smaller here from Prudhoe Bay over towards Barrow. And the pack ice is continuing to hold strong offshore, but the marginal area continues to grow a little bit smaller. So off into the southeastern portion of the state for our Marines, we can see here south to southeast winds across the inner passageways, anywhere between 10 to 20 knots, a little bit stronger up towards Lynn Canal, and 2 to 3 foot seas. And then out over the open waters, easterly winds for the southern portion of the Gulf, but becoming west and northwest at about 10 knots, and seas generally between 3 and 5 feet out over the open waters. And into Wednesday now, again, southeast to southerly flow over the inner passageways, 20 knots, a little bit stronger here towards Clarence Strait and up towards Lynn Canal, and in the middle by Petersburg, only about 10 knots and seas 2 to 4 feet. And out over the open waters, generally going to see a northwest to northerly flow, except just down over the southern portion, a little bit of southerly winds there, 10 to 15 knots and seas 3 to 5 feet. For south central Alaska, you'll notice the trend here is going to be pretty calm and variable for a lot of the inside waters, especially Prince William Sound, variable at 10 knots, seas 2 feet. Out over the northern Gulf, 10 knots in variable conditions, seas 2 to 3 feet. Out over the inlet, that's where we have a little bit stronger of an up inlet push, as we call it, and that's where it's about 15 knots out of the south, highest seas at about 3 to 4 feet. And then on into Wednesday, things improve even more with that kind of weak coastal ridging and not a real strong system anywhere in the area, so variable winds throughout the whole area, except for northwest across the southern portion of Cook Inlet, and seas generally between 1 and 3 feet. For the Alaska Peninsula, out of the west and southwest, 15 to 20 knots, seas between 3 and 5 feet on Tuesday. And then for Wednesday, we switch everything to out of the northwest as that front starts to slide through, 20 knots and seas 5 feet. For the Aleutians, you can expect general west to northwest winds, possibly a little gusty here on the south side of the chain with some of those channel flows through those northwest passages, and generally between 15 and 20 knots. Out over the western portion of the Aleutians, westerly and southwesterly winds, 20 knots, and seas running between 4 and 5 feet. And then for Wednesday out over the Aleutians, More west to northwest winds for the eastern Aleutians, generally about 20 knots and seas 4 to 6 feet. And then starting to see some southwest winds at about 25 knots, small craft levels there out towards zone 178 and seas about 4 to 7 feet. Towards the west coast on Tuesday, looking for westerly winds 15 to 20 knots and generally seas 4 to 5 feet. And then for Wednesday, you can see the flow switches a little bit more behind that front. Northwest winds 15 to 20 knots and then becoming west and southwest west of the Pribilof Islands and seas generally between 5 and 7 feet. And then out over the Arctic coast here, my first time having to report the sea conditions with no ice pack up there. And so we have our northerly winds behind the front and then westerly winds keeping some of those high surf advisories out along the northeastern portion of the Arctic coast. Winds generally between 15 and 25 knots and seas all the way up to 8 feet here north of Kaktovik. And then things calm down quite a bit there on Wednesday, looking for a little bit more confused flow around the northern portion of the state and seas generally between 1 and 4 feet, winds 5 to 15 knots. So let's recap our weather for tonight. We expect general wet conditions with onshore flow from southwest to northeast, basically all the way from Bristol Bay up into the interior portions of the state. Our most active weather will remain here right along the Brooks Range. Flood advisory in effect along the northwest Brooks Range for some rapid rises on small streams, and that's until 5:30 on Tuesday. And then we have our high winds about 45 miles an hour east of the Dalton Highway until about 10 o'clock tonight. Southeast remains relatively quiet tonight, but as this low makes its way northward on Tuesday, expect an uptick in precipitation chances. Possibility of some isolated thunderstorms over the eastern Copper River Basin, and again, widespread showers, but not expecting anything overly heavy in the amount of precipitation received at any location on Tuesday. And then on into Wednesday, again, generally wet conditions, but nothing overly heavy, with just cooler and cloudy conditions expected across southern Alaska. Thanks for joining us. Hope you have a great night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.